Hi, I'm Jason Gorber for ThatShelf.com, and we're going to talk a little bit about the earth-shattering, crazy news that's affecting, I don't know, a couple hundred vinyl nerds.
Big shelf.
Because of the dramatic news that has come out that Mobile Fidelity uses on a relatively consistent basis digital intermediaries between the actual master tape or whatever the master is and them pressing vinyl. Now, this has been going on for a long time. There's been a lot of speculation about it, and where it really came to the head, for those that, you know, for God forbid you're actually diving into this nonsense, was when they announced that there's going to be 40,000 copies of Thriller, and people were like, "How are you're gonna run the master tape that many times, like, to do it?" So the short version is, for those that have been paying attention, is that Mobile Fidelity traditionally had two different ways of actually working. They had original master recording on top, where that you knew that you had access at some point in time to what was considered the master, and then you had Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs, or whatever it was on the top, and that sort of designated that they couldn't determine the vintage, the veracity of their source material. If you actually look at the Bob Dylan releases, some of them have Omar on them, and some of them do not. And it was always sort of assumed by many people, potentially myself included, that if you had the master tape, you're probably using the master tape to make vinyl. Makes sense? That's sort of the way we think of these things. And there's been a lot of dramatic discussion about the importance of having an all analog path, about using tubes and all this stuff. And if you read a bunch of Mobile Fidelity materials, they go on about all this. They talk about their Gain 2 system. Back in the day, you used to be able, when you got UHQR, you got like technical certifications about how the vinyl's pressed, all kinds of stuff. All of which leads people to believe, for very justifiable reasons, that using digital anywhere here, especially on something like vinyl, is cheap. Like, if I'm going to go with digital, why the hell wouldn't I just buy the CD or the HD tracks FLAC or a DSD file on a Super Audio CD? Why would a Super Audio CD be any different, if not inferior, if not superior, to anything that's released on vinyl? Which comes down to the fundamental point that is this: vinyl playback is always a compromise. Digital playback, always a compromise. You are always sort of at the whims of your equipment, the whims of your speakers, whims of your room, whims of your taste, the whims of how the mastering engineer decided to futz or not futz with the master recording. There are master recordings that were always meant to be the basis, sort of a clean, plain vanilla mix that were always going to be sweetened when you actually did releases. From the beginning of recording. Certainly the beginning of when you were recorded on tape and actually made additional duplicative elements out of that. It's been that way. People are EQing, people are tweaking, people are making it. So why, when you go to Discogs or whatever, there are hundreds of different versions, and many of them sound slightly different. Some of them sound radically different. Certain ones get praised, and certain ones get shot up on. But the real question is, what's the real one? And let me put on my little philosophy hat and get all about Plato, about what counts as the real chair, as we sort of see the form of the chair, and all that half-remembered nonsense that I have from too much academic philosophy, and simply say, none of them's the real one. They're all releases. They're all there. Now, that might be a little bit too deep and too philosophical, but nonetheless, all of them are releases. Even if it is the quote-unquote master, and even if you are reading that file directly off the tape, that is, if it's analog tape, is months, years, days, eons after it was originally recorded. Tape deteriorates, not quite as much as some material does. First pressings, hypothetically, every time you play a record, even on exquisite equipment, you are altering microscopically, whatever you want to say. You are affecting the sound as it goes around. Every DAC has a slightly different sound signature, microscopically or macroscopically. So the fact of the matter is, which one are you playing? How did you digitize? How did it go in? Are you playing back the digital file on the same type of equipment, the same type of speakers that they did when they were actually mastering it? Are you hearing what they heard? Of course you're not. You go back to the same studio and things might be different. Cables might be, whatever the heck it is that actually changes the sound. This is not to deflect the fact that MoFi was playing a game. They knew that a bunch of their records were on all kinds of people's top 100 analog lists of all time, that they had people extolling the virtues, that they're selling for 125 US. And again, all the Americans complain about it. Trust me, as a Canadian, it's much more expensive than 125 bucks up here. And there are those that collect this stuff because they want to have not only the ultimate sound, but they want the object to be an analog object, because they do not want to believe in a world where something that is analog can be improved by something that has gone through a digital process. And I deal with this, and the reason I made this video, I deal with this all the time. I'm a film critic. It's what my sort of real gig is. I love vinyl, and this is one of the reasons I talk about it on this channel. That shelf, we are very much committed to the stuff we collect, things that we put on that shelf that we celebrate. But the fact of the matter is that I have, the last 20-something years, seen all kinds of people that fetishize the sort of analog medium, as if somehow that's the pure expression of something cinematic, and they would rather watch a beat to shit 35mm print than actually something that is properly presented. The best digital projection, laser projection, scan from original negative, looks stunning. Looks better than it would have looked any print you would have had. And I get that if the point is to replicate the experience of seeing it, I am not interested in replicating shitty. Same thing with vinyl. If you wanted something that sounds like a first pressing and it was done in the United States in the early 1970s, and we went through the oil crisis, and we're actually dealing with stuff on vinyl where the actual vinyl compound itself was a restriction, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in getting the best damn presentation of this stuff that I can. Period. And the best is going to continue to be subjective, and we're going to continue to hunt, and that's part of the fun of this hobby, is that we collect. We do these things to actually try to, you know, we have different versions. Why do I have 6 versions of Tommy and 12 of Who's Next and all these different Beatles versions? Because sometimes listening to different versions lets you recognize something in the other version. I listened to a version that's pressed in 1977 that's of the Beatles, which is the same plate, the same metalwork that was used from the original mastering, but on better vinyl and much less expensive than a first pressing. And when I listen to that, it's a little loud here. When I listen to that, it is absolutely different than the stereo box set, which is a little bit underwhelming because the choices that they made were for a different version, were for a CD audience, for a streaming audience. I recognize that. Everybody, most people in this hobby recognize that. Does that mean digital bad, analog good? Bullshit. Absolutely not. Does that mean digital good, analog bad? Bullshit. Analog medium can be extraordinary for sound reproduction from a digital source, period. Analog medium like film can be extraordinary, laser projected, beautifully color timed, grain maintained, high dynamic range. All of these things can be amazing. Do they fuck it up all the goddamn time? Do they fuck it up when it's celluloid? Yes. I am old enough to remember Prince breaking in the middle of PRINTS, breaking in the middle of projections at world premieres way more often than I've ever had DCP issues or locking issues or any of that stuff. Now, things have gotten better, things are a little bit easier, but nonetheless, people who have this sort of nostalgia for a particular way of things would be. I happen to be at a film festival right now. Here's Fantasia. I think if I do this, swing around, somewhere up here, oh, where are we? I've totally messed this up. But somewhere up behind me is a sign for, there we are, see? I'm backwards. Somewhere up there is a sign for Fantasia. Fantasia is a beautiful celebration of cinema where a bunch of stuff screens on 35, some of it looking terrible. There's a bunch of trailers and stuff like that that do. That's fine, it's nostalgic, it's fun, and it's a little bit wonky. But some of the restorations and stuff that they have is stunning and beautiful. And it's not stunning and beautiful because it looks like a videotape or it's digitally or whatever. It's because it looks fantastic. Is it as good as digital projection does? No, because I'm here at a college, here at a university screening thing. But where I have seen stuff look absolutely stunning in environments where it's actually done, it's done well. So can you do beautiful digital source to an analog medium like a vinyl, so that the playback mechanism, which you are controlling, is able to extract the most of the information from a studio situation, aka a mastering studio situation, in the best and ultimate way? And if that process of getting it to sound as close to the most pristine version that you can, be it Exxon Main Street and all the shitting on Miles Showell for doing it, or whether it's the Pink Floyd set that Vernon Grumman did, or the Sade set that I've barely listened to, but nonetheless, I have tons of records of Springsteen using Plantagenet. Some of the half-speed masters that are just shat on just because, well, it's half-speed, so therefore it must be done, it must be terrible because it went through some digital process. Absolutely, it could be terrible, but it could be amazing. And this illustrates, this whole MoFi debacle illustrates that not only could it be amazing, it has been so amazing that those that claim to be able to hear like it's night and day, like you're an idiot if you don't notice, like you are somehow just an audio moron if you cannot tell the difference between a high-resolution DSD file master, cutting master, and a tape. And those people are shown to be fools today. And it's unfortunate because, look, again, critic. We're not known for the most of humility, but when we get something factual wrong, it's one thing. But when we lay claim to a notion that we are able to ascertain specific cues, audio cues of such microscopic detail, when we have a professional notion that somehow we are able to not determine between A and B, between one mastering and another mastering and preferring one or the other, but to say this is bad, and the reason it's bad is because I can hear that it's digital, is today officially horseshit. It is. Because digital analog conversion, or in this case analog to digital conversion, has gotten so good, and using technology of multiplied versions of DST, so many times the essential resolution, the frequency of normal super audio CD, the archival version of audio, absolutely, I'm not gonna say no difference because then it gets that's another dramatic thing. Imperceptible difference, humanly imperceptible difference. We're there. We are not there with visual. You can tell the difference between something that is digitally, even the best laser projected, and something that is analog projected. You can. Quite simple. Usually the analog projection actually looks worse. If something is from the negative and struck from the negative, it's of course never struck from the negative. There's inner positives, there's all this stuff. But the fact of the matter is that I know 100 years from now, that film that has been digitally stored and preserved will, God willing, with proper restoration, be the same 100 years from now. In some ways it might be better, because the actual projector will be able to extract some of the information that was actually captured in the scan and actually present it in a way that if laser projector, whatever crazy, imagine we have wall-sized, the equivalent of micro LEDs or OLED, going in that direction. So emissive projection, essentially. How amazing is it going to be when you have 100% black on screen and million times contrast ratio? Will that look like what film looked like? No. Will it look like more similar to what 35mm looked like when the person was standing in front of a Moviola or a Steenbeck and they're looking at a very small screen? Yes. Pre-color timing and all of that other nonsense. I think in film, those that know that there's all kinds of processes. That what's in the camera, if you're shooting film, is never what you're going to project. It's always going to go through a process. Color timing, chemical baths, now digital intermediates. So even the most analog of analog people at some point in time for some of their films are going through some digital process and you can contrast A to B. You're never not going to have some sort of digital process. Something like Christopher Nolan that so proudly shoots stuff in 70 millimeter and then does stuff like has CGI. At some point in time, you got scanning back and forth. Somebody like Denis Villeneuve, who shot Dune all on digital, then printed it to film and then scanned the film so that he would get film grain baked in. It's the absolute equivalent of recording in Pro Tools, putting it on vinyl, digitizing the vinyl, and then mixing that as your main soundtrack. People do that all the time. Quentin Tarantino uses his soundtrack. They actually digitize his copies of his records. It's not just that they go to the master and they do it. He wants his pops and clicks. God bless. But in audio, there's still this prevailing sense that there's this divide. And the funny thing is, in terms of visual, in terms of video, celluloid, or whatever, I'll even buy it. I'll even say, yeah, there's a difference. I just think I will trade 99 times out of 100 an exceptional digital presentation to even a very, very good, if not exceptional, 35 millimeter presentation, let alone 70, that if it's just a blow up. And 100% of the time, if it's even a little bit arbitrary about how the actual print is, I will take a mediocre digital over a very good celluloid, because often scratches, cigarette burns and all that stuff, sure, you can enjoy that as the sort of artifact, as the fetish, as the pops and clicks, as it were, in vinyl. I get it. But when I'm watching a movie, that's detritus, that's distraction. And now you're watching the thing like looking at a vase or something like that. And for me, that's not what movies are. Music sometimes gets you in the mood. Fine, you're listening to music and you're responding to it, sometimes in a different way. But for movie, I have a different aesthetic. Not everybody does. There are people who love watching stuff that are like, my favorite film was on VHS, so I'm going to watch it on VHS. I think you're ridiculous, but God bless. Everybody has their own tastes. But these are now subjective. We are not talking about what objectively is the master. What objectively is the better sounding version, the version that should be preserved, the version that should be there for all time. And there's a notion that somehow the analog version, the one on tape, is unchanging and unending, and the digital one is inevitably a compromise, somehow a compromise. And for years it was. AD and DA converters weren't very great. But now they really are in the audio. It's almost trivial in terms of computation to deal with audio. Video, especially at 8K, higher resolutions, is still incredibly hard. What happens is that audio resolution increases, but nowhere near as dramatically as the need for actually doing video. It's simple as that. So here we are. Mobile Fidelity finally sort of came clean thanks to a record retailer who's, you know, quite engaging. I actually like Mike Esposito's video a lot. I find Michael Fremer has been, over the years, a big champion. Everybody gives him respect, mishpacha, but he's coming across as an asshole. One who's blaming everybody else and showing zero humility. He sees himself as the person who saved analog audio. Maybe in some ways he is, but I bet a lot of other people could lay credit that are a lot less loud. And more importantly, when he actually says stuff and then takes it back, there's a very poor job of actually standing back and saying, hey, I wasn't right about this. This isn't me to gloat, this is just what it is. I, for one, am ecstatic that Mobile Fidelity has taken the care to present some of these albums, especially the one-steps, especially the Bob Dylans, especially the Miles Davis, in the best goddamn way they have ever sounded on vinyl, period. Better than first pressings, better than any analog medium. Those Dylans are amazing. Some of those one-steps are amazing. I have a better analog playback system now than I do my digital, but even if I was to play the digital files, the process of mastering and making it transform onto vinyl in the same way that sometimes a photograph looks a little bit better on canvas, again, or, I mean, go back to it, you want to show celluloid, fucking show celluloid, but show celluloid from a digital source. That's what a lot of people do, right? They like Quentin Tarantino's 35 prints are coming from a DI. He says they're not, but whatever the hell most often is taking place is that. When it comes to analog, the process of making the record has a specific sound, a specific signature that I enjoy. I enjoy the ritual of it, I enjoy all of it. I also have the SACDs. I also have the Blu-ray audios. I have the FLACs. This is music, and we all love music, and we all love this. But we should not fall in love with is the particular. The box isn't what we need to love. The packaging isn't what we need to love. We need to actually get the most of the music. I understand that, so for many people this will be super frustrating. They'll feel disappointed, they'll feel duped, they'll feel made to feel stupid. There's other people who are going to feel super smug, and I'm probably closer to that than not, but I'm trying not to be here. I've said all along, I had questions about this. My assumption, like Mike Esposito, was that they were just doing dupe tapes. I mean, it was the only way it made sense to me. I never in a million years thought they were actually running the real master tape over and over and over again, in the same way that they had cutting masters all the time back in the day. I just assume you want to make one copy of the master. It's the same way that when companies like Analog Productions or any of the other companies that make the reel-to-reel tapes, they're not running the master tape over time. They have multiple tape machines that run the one tape once and then do a whole ton of copies, and that's sort of how it works. Is it surprising to me that all the Sony releases from Mobile Fidelity are not being done on 2-inch magnetic tape when it's the company that spent millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars developing DSD for the purposes of this archiving? No, but what was stated today is that they were not taking the Sony DSD masters in all cases. Some they were, some they weren't. But they're actually making their own DSD masters. They were using their Studer tape player, Mobile Fidelity, and making their DSD safety. And this benefits a couple people. This benefits the record label, because now they have an amazing DSD master that they can do whatever the hell they want with, presumably. And it allows Mobile Fidelity to continue to produce these records ad infinitum. With that digital archive file, we will continue for dozens, if not hundreds of years, to be able, if we want, on petrochemical products, produce analog playback of these masters. Cutting masters, let's call them that. These cutting masters happen to be from a digital file that is audio indistinguishable, auditorially indistinguishable from any tape and any medium. Want to make a master tape and cut from the tape? Great, go to DSD to tape. Cut from that. Go ahead. I dare you to hear a difference. You're not going to. Some of the most golden years people have not. So, punchline is this. Enjoy your collection. Go listen to some music. Go actually pull out one of your records, put it on the turntable, and just enjoy the hell of it. Don't get caught up on whether something's analog or digital or this or that. Just enjoy the stuff. Look, we are somebody who we're already the people who've gotten this far in this video. We're already the lunatics that are worrying about like which version that we are actually buying. Buy the best darn version that you can afford and that you would like, and let us praise in some ways the likes of Mobile Fidelity for continuing to produce stuff that sounds so goddamn good, because their care of actually on the mastering side is exemplary. They make records sound better than other people make their records sound. When I buy a version of Bob Dylan, I will sell my Sony version. Even if the Sony version came from the same file, the Mobile Fidelity version sounds better because they're better at doing what they do. And whomever you are and whatever you do, just because it's AAA doesn't mean it's bad. It definitely doesn't mean it's good. Just because it's digitally sourced doesn't mean it's bad, doesn't mean it's good. But what it does mean is that you have to do sometimes a little bit of homework, and sometimes wading into this sort of nightmare of the forums. Sometimes you just got to listen. If it works for you, great. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But we have, thanks to people who are doing these kind of archival stuff, thanks to people doing research on DSD, thanks to all of this stuff, we have seen today, we have seen the light. We have seen that we can archive for in perpetuity how goddamn good some of these records can sound. For thatshelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe, let us know in the comments what you think about this whole craziness. Yeah, we'll see you next video. All the best. Take care.